Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and Donald Trump has had to say that he's going to order the release of the Epstein files. I'd still keep very careful eye on it if I was MAGA supporters in terms of exactly what he's released. But it's come to this because Trump has said, hey, they're all making a fuss, absolute fuss. So why has he now been forced to do this? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to explain what led up to this, why Donald Trump has been forced to release the Epstein files, which he didn't want to do. So those paying attention may know that Trump had no intention of ever releasing these Epstein files. Personally, I don't know why. Yes, it's probably going to implicate him, but I doubt with anything we didn't strongly suspect anyway. Let's be honest, Trump is reorganizing America to make sure he never faces legal consequences again. Not while he's president, not after he's president. If he doesn't succeed, there are other cases waiting for him at the end of his term. If he does succeed, then any extra potential charges aren't going to bother him. And if Trump was just worried about public attitudes if he released all the files, then not releasing them seems to be doing way more damage. But for whatever reason, Trump doesn't want to release the files now. That was always the case. Remember, if he hadn't won last year's election, he would now be in prison. Orange clothes instead of an orange face. That would have been the end of him. He was so desperate to win that he would say anything to get elected. And indeed he did. But refusing to release these files poses a risk to his support. Trump exploded onto the political scene with one statement of truth and one lie. The truth was that ordinary Americans were being screwed over by the establishment. Just as in the UK, the standard of living in the US has been falling for decades, but it got to the point where, in the wake of the banking crisis, it became noticeable. Trump tapped into that, but pointing out the truth wasn't enough. He needed to persuade those ordinary Americans that he was on their side. This was the lie. The reality was that Trump was way worse than the establishment. But it's a lie which worked because the establishment were clearly against him. Why would the establishment be attacking him if he was part of the establishment? The Democrats were obviously opposed to him, but even Republican elites tried unsuccessfully to stop him winning their own candidacy. What Americans saw was a man who was pointing out the failures in the system and whom the establishment were desperate to stop. Well, you can see how a lot of people would believe Trump really was different, that he would be on their side. But could the Epstein files destroy that perception? The Epstein files represent, to MAGA supporters, an establishment cover-up. Now, it doesn't matter whether it is or it isn't. That's how it's seen. Trump promised to release the files. He's now gone back on that promise. He first attempted all sorts of excuses, mostly centred around there being nothing untoward in the files. The problem is that this is easily countered. Elon Musk taunted Trump by saying, wow, amazing, that Epstein killed himself and Ghislaine Maxwell is in federal prison for a hoax. This is something that will connect with a chunk of MAGA supporters who will care about this. They will think that, yes, a wealthy woman is in prison, but she can't have been the only one who should be doing time. Musk also challenged Trump to release the files and point out which bit is the hoax. Trump's failure to make a case for not releasing the files that wasn't easily shot down then caused him to snap earlier this week and call MAGA supporters who were making a fuss about it weaklings. He tried to say they were falling for a radical left hoax. But the people Trump identifies as being on the radical left are calling for the release of the files. MAGA supporters believe it's the Democrats who want the files suppressed because it implicates many of their own. But the Democrats have said, no, we think they should be released. In fact, they've even tried to legislate to have them released. Obviously, the Republicans have been blocking those moves. But you now have people from all over the political spectrum calling for the files to be released. The only person resisting is Trump himself, and of course those he appointed to his government. I think even Maxwell has called for their release. I guess it makes no further difference to her. And now we have the sight of some MAGA supporters burning their precious hats. I hope they stood well away from the fumes, by the way. I mean, they're made in China for the American market. I'm not sure they've been manufactured to any sort of safety standards. In fact, this stunt could have actually gone quite wrong if they'd been made in Europe. A little bit like that idiot who a few years ago tried to set fire to an EU flag, and they couldn't because EU standards make things like that hard to burn. But these hats were burning, and it's a powerful image, even if it's only a few supporters doing it at the moment. It's a very visual sign of disillusionment with Trump, really. Trump is a billionaire. He was born into extreme wealth and privilege. He's never known tough times. It should be quite hard for a man like that to claim to be on the side of the downtrodden, given that he has spent his life treading on them. He's even boasted about screwing the public over when it comes to not paying his taxes. Oh, that's smart business, right? That's how he describes it. What convinced them was his openness about how ordinary Americans have been screwed over and his specific promises to drain the swamp. Well, as far as a lot of MAGA supporters are concerned, the Epstein files is a very smelly part of that swamp. If it does represent a cover-up, well, of course they want it exposing. And if there really is nothing in the files, well, what's the harm in releasing them? And then when you've got like establishment figures such as Mike Pence, Mike Johnson, loads of Democrats, all saying the files should be released, it becomes much harder for Trump to try and claim there's some good reason not to. And that's the problem. Trump is trying to argue that there is no good reason to release them, but that argument is the wrong way round. The question is, what is the good reason not to release them? See, state records as a matter of default should always be available to the public, unless it serves the public interest to maintain confidentiality, which of course it does in a lot of cases. So what Trump needs to do is not say there's nothing in the files to justify releasing them. Releasing them comes at no great cost. He needs to say how the public would be harmed by their release. And right now, he's not making that case. And Trump may imagine that he can follow some standard political wisdom here, ride out an unpopular move because it's early on in the term and it'll blow over. But, you know, ordinary voters, they may not care about the issue, but they are deeply unhappy over his cuts and damage he's doing to the US economy. Damage which will accelerate if he follows through on his threat to sack the chair of the Fed and install a puppet who will cut interest rates. Have fun with hyperinflation, America. But the MAGA supporters who want the release of these files, they have a tendency to fixate on things. You may have noticed. It represents something important to them. I'm not convinced it will just blow over. So the question becomes just how many MAGA supporters care deeply about this issue. Because the midterms are not much more than 15 months away. By which time MAGA supporters may not only be reflecting upon this betrayal, but may also be questioning why their lives aren't getting any better. Is Trump really anti-establishment? So now, at the end of all this, because Trump was looking at a serious loss of support, and he does, even though he's not going to stand for election again, he does still need that support for the power he needs after the midterms and beyond. So he's now said, well, look, okay, as you've made a fuss, you're ridiculous people, I'm going to order their release now. But then it'll just ask the question, so why didn't you do so beforehand? And if what they release actually shows nothing untoward, people will still ask, so why did you hold off on releasing them if they don't do any harm and there's nothing in them? And will MAGA supporters then think, so what haven't you released still? Is this something that Trump cannot now get away from because he tried to block the release in the first place? But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.